Organising a collection. How do you do it? Hello and welcome to this week's video. I've done a couple of physical media related videos recently, both looking at what I've got and talking about the fact that I think it's time to stop buying things last week. This week I wanted to talk about how do you organise it? Because it can be kind of confusing when you've got a lot and kind of difficult. Now, I'm more talking about movies here. I think TV works relatively differently because I think it's easier to kind of do it because, like, if you've got like a series like say the X Files or Buffy, there's so many seasons of it. It fits up a certain kind of room on your shelf. So however you organize it, they're fairly easy to find. Whereas movies, unless you go in for these ridiculous little deluxe box sets that are £100 for one movie, they fill up a relatively small space. So when you've got lots of them, it can be easy for some to kind of disappear into the mix. Now, again, those of you who watch my channel, you'll know some of how I organize it in terms of like 80s movies. Although to be honest, the 80s movie overview that when I showed you what my 80s collection, that was when they were in alphabetical order. I have since gone back to doing what I used to do before I moved, which was have them in year order, which is reasonable. But again, even then, you've still got to know what year they were released. And I haven't even shown you, and probably won't for a while because chaos still and chaos to come because of another move coming probably to somewhere smaller. So it's going to be a while before I get organised. God, I'll get settled one day in the year 2050. I still haven't shown you like my 70s movie collection or my 90s and even 21st century collection. And the main reason I haven't done that is because they're not in any order at all at the moment. My 80s one is nicely organised and set. Those are just kind of all over the place. I mean, they're in individual sets, like 70s movie on one bookcase and 90s and 21st century on another, but they're not in any kind of bloody order. And I've been moving stuff about because I'm selected a bunch to purge because again I'm probably going to get something smaller, so I'm getting rid of a lot of stuff, and that includes DVDs and Blu-rays, either movies that I'm simply not interested in anymore or ones that were blind buys that just didn't do it for me. I'm not keeping all that crap on my shelf, and I haven't counted them, but I think there's about 90, which is a insanely depressing waste of money. But there you go. The bane of the physical media collector. But again, because they're not organized, I'm thinking about how do I organize them? Do I want when I get round to it? Do I want to go back to organizing them in years, which again can be difficult if you don't necessarily instantly know the year a movie was made. I don't really like alphabetical because although that's easy to find, it doesn't really make any aesthetic sense. Now, I know some people kind of organize by genre. They have all their horror movies together on one thing, and I did try that once. All their comedies or all their action movies. But again, I didn't really like that because I have this thing. About I like separating the decades. I like having 80s movies to have their own bookcase, their own space. And I like that with 70s movies as well. And even 90s movies. Less so with like the last 20 years because I care less about the last 20 odd years. But I like things to have their own kind of space because it gives it a... I don't like horror. Having a horror bookcase sounds cool, but then you've got 70s horrors on the same bookcase as a 2010s movie. And that just doesn't make sense to me. What I have been thinking about maybe doing is having like – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – individual kind of series or genres within that decade, keeping the decades, but having like an individual collection within that collection, like say the 90s, because they're pretty much on the same bookcase. It's a sizable bookcase, and I haven't got that many 21st century movies. Honestly, there's a couple of shelves worth, but not as many as before. I've been thinking of stuff like, for example, the late 90s, early 2000s kind of teen movie craze, the teen slashers and all the teen comedies. They should go together. Put them in a thing. You can keep them on the 90s shelf on the bookcase, but they should kind of go together. And you could even keep them in that year of release order. But they should go together in like its own little series, its own little genre. Slasher movie, like all the 80s slasher movies together, all like the 80s comedies movies together. That whole 80s kind of comedy troupe, the Steve Martins, the Chevy Chase, the Dan Aykroyd, the John Candy, the Bill Murray, all them kind of together within the context of an 80s thing. So I don't know. I'm thinking about doing that again. I could do that for the 80s one now. I can't really do it for the 70s or anything else because they're in chaos at the moment. And one of the 90s, 2000s one is in a room that is stuffed full of junk that I've got to get rid of. It's a pain in the ass even to get to. And again, I'm going to be moving soon anyway, so what's the point getting organised when it's going to get disorganised anyway? But I am thinking about kind of doing that sort of thing because I like the idea of keeping them into decades, but at the same time I still feel like it's lacking something. I still feel like it needs some kind of more kind of consistency, like all these sorts of movies together within that decade. Anyway, any fellow physical media collectors with a reasonably large collection, how do you do it? Do you think that's a good idea, or do you just stick to alphabetical, or do you even bother separating decades and just shove them all on alphabetically? Again, I did try that once, but it just weirded me out having you got a 70s movie in the A's followed by something from 2017. It just doesn't make any freaking sense to me. Anyway, let me know if anybody else thinks about this sort of thing far too much. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you again soon.